Why do I need to do, there we go.
Give me a point when you're ready.
It's ready.
Okay. Well, good evening. I'm Councilmember Jeff Bluebow, and I want to welcome everyone to tonight's District Advisory Board meeting. So we'll now call the August 2019 District Board Advisory Board meeting to order. So if you could please stand, we'll pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can I get an approval for the agenda for tonight?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, motion by Don.
Second.
Second by Michael. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Can I get an approval for the meeting minutes for the July 1st?
Motion to approve.
Okay, motion to approve from Nat.
I'll second.
Okay, second by Stephanie. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we'll go on to staff reports. No fires, so we'll jump right into police.
Good evening, Officer Rock Kemp from Patrol South Community Policing. Just gonna basically touch on the stats for the month of July. Overall, for in the DAB area, crime has seen a slight decrease. Larceny autos are still leading the way with 89. The biggest drop was in auto thefts. There were 8 fewer in the month of July than there was in June. Pretty much when you're looking at beat areas within the DAB, 299 on Patrol South and 13 beat within the Patrol West Bureau pretty much carry the majority of the call load within the DAB areas. So one of the things that I know Patrol South as well as the other bureaus, we're kind of focused on some different crimes with some special assignments coming up. Patrol South, we're going to be focused on all of thefts. That's what we've seen an increase the most this year. Some of the other bureaus are going to focus on larcenies from autos and things like that within their respective bureaus. Does anyone have any questions?
Any questions?
Do you know if the rise of porch theft has gone up over the year, or more recently, since we're coming to summer? It seems to me like a lot of porch, what they call, porch bandits or whatever, where they just come up.
Like the mail thefts and things like that.
I think we could run.
I can't say 100% that I've seen an increase in it. But it is a common thing nowadays with like the Ring doorbell systems and Nest systems and the cameras. I know that's a good deterrent, and you can share a lot of video and photos within the community, but even with law enforcement and things like that. But, I can't give you an exact rise or fall in that particular issue. Anything else?
Other questions? Okay, thanks for coming in tonight.
Thank you.
Appreciate everything you guys are doing. Don't see any fire here, so we'll go right into the library report. Robin Bell. Good evening, Robin.
Good evening. I'm Robin Belt, branch manager of the Alfred and also the Linwood libraries. Our circulation count at Alfred for July was 13,014 items, and then our gate count was 8,316 visits. So this month, summer reading wrapped up at the end of July, so we're moving more onto our adult programming for August and into the fall. from tomorrow, it's xeriscaping, creating beautiful low maintenance gardens using less water. And then the last topic on August 27th is fall lawn care, tips for growing the best lawn on the block. And so, any of those classes, if you're interested in, we ask that you also register on our website or by, calling one of the branches. And then finally, all Wichita Public Library locations will be closed on Sunday, September 1st and Monday, September 2nd for Labor Day. After that holiday weekend, Alfred will again be open on Sundays from 1 to 5 p.m. And right now we're closed on Sundays, so that's all I have.
Is all the information on the website for?
For the gardening program?
Yes.
Or, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, and it's actually Tuesday evenings, 6 to 7:30 here at Alfred. If there's a topic and, you've got a schedule conflict, they're also doing the same series at the Westlake branch, and those are on Thursday evenings. It's the same presentation, so.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Want to recognize Representative Jim Ward. Thank you for being here tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So we'll go on to, the public agenda. And is there, before we do, is there any individual that would like to speak on an item that is not on the public agenda? If so, please raise your name and state your address. Okay, we'll go on to new business. And first thing, we'll hear about a presentation regarding a percentage of the capital improvement program, which would be set aside for public works.
I give him a flash drive to share the presentation.
Would have been really, okay, sorry about that.
So thank you for having us this evening. My name is Martha Linsner. I'm currently serving as the president of the Arts Council. And along with me is Arlen Hamilton, past president of the Arts Council. And we have Mr. Manning here to help us with the difficult questions that happen to come up. So thank you for joining us. So, it's been a couple of years ago, City Manager Bob Layton asked Patricia McDonald over at the Wichita Art Museum to form an ad hoc committee to look at a funding mechanism to, have a dedicated percentage of various funding sources. We'll cover those later in the presentation with regard to, having some designated funds, and those funds would then be available to fund art projects in our community. So this is a public art plan, and it's not that the city hasn't had funding for arts in the past, we've just not had a systematic way of determining how much money we were going to spend, or, thank you. Likewise, where we were going to spend it. So the Design Council has been instrumental in helping make those decisions in the past. So what we're presenting is an ordinance, and hopefully later this year, we will go to City Council and present that. I wanted to come out and visit with each of the DAB committees throughout the community, because we really think it's important that the funding be spread across all of the districts done each year by the Americans for the Arts, which is a scientific survey, and 72% of Americans believe that the arts unify our community, regardless of age, race, and ethnicity. So, that's just the real nutshell, why public art is important. Moving on, next we have an example of integrated art, and this is Millennium Park. You may have seen this if you've been to Chicago. An example of integrated art, and some points here that 70% of Americans believe that arts improve image and identity. So it's really important as we are trying to grow our workforce and bring companies, industries, attract tourists to our community, that we have a vibrant and beautiful art scene, and that our city is just pleasing to the eye. There's information out there that proves that this is really important to the city. A few more examples, getting now to one here in Wichita. This is integrated art up there in the left-hand corner of the West Douglas Park. And New Market is another area, and then some of these places may look familiar. If you have not seen them, hopefully you can venture out and explore. So public art fosters neighborhoods and art community pride. So we want to make sure that in each of our DAP districts that we have pleasing to the eye, things that our citizens can be proud of, share those details with others, whether those are friends or family that are coming to town to visit. Getting a little closer to home here, we all drive Kellogg and see the example there again of integrated art by the artist Vicky Scurry. Up in the top right there is the cattail bins and gates over at Watson Park. And then we have the little arc pedestrian bridge and water line. So instead of just putting a boring water line across the river, it was added, some art was added. That's by artist Kent Williams. And you know, if you've been in this area, you see our citizens using this bridge, and it's a connector from community to community. So really the belief that art is functional, inspiring, beautiful, and it can add some elements to our infrastructure that are really important, and want to make sure that those thought processors and the money is available up front as we're going into these design processes. Then we have our new Eisenhower Airport, and just a great example of how art was incorporated into that project, so that when people arrive in our city, or people that live here or headed to the airport, they can be reminded of what
these slides are a little bit hard to read here on the screen, but it talks about the fact that we have 350 public art programs all across the United States. Most of those are housed within local governments, and as they administer these programs across the nation, there are several different ways of doing that, but the vast majority of them are housed within government entities. And a lot of the reasons these places have this is they have figured out that having this public art shows that you have pride in your community, draws people in. They know that where there is public art, there is less crime. Where there is public art, there's less graffiti. Where there's public art, there's more people gathering. So we've talked a lot about public art, but we also have to realize that part of this is aesthetic improvement. A big part of what we've already ran through is not necessarily standalone, but even the example that was given here in this district is just part of making a pavilion of a park a more beautiful and welcoming place. So as we look across the nation and try to figure out, okay, what is everybody else doing, and then how can we make this a Wichita program? We looked at many of the cities that our city council folks and business leaders are visiting, in the Chamber of Commerce, city-to-city tours, and we looked to see what those folks are doing. And as you look through here, you'll see most of them are using 1% of their capital improvement budget. The one that you see up there, if you can see the number, you'll see one that says 1.5%. That is of a specific funding sources, and that is in Des Moines. We'll be revisiting that concept here in just a bit. The highest in the nation that we have found is in Austin, and they are actually using 2% of their entire CIP. So I don't want this slide to be misleading that Des Moines is doing 1.5 of their entire CIP. It is of a cutout of their CIP. The others are just going against the CIP. Years ago, there was an ordinance passed in the city that said we should be considering aesthetics and public art when we were building public infrastructure. That the current design council was called by a different name at that time, but that's when the design council was established, and we established an ordinance that said we should be considering this if we're going to compete in the marketplace. The thing that's missing in there is a mechanism. So we've sort of been all over the place, and we have a lot of extra effort having to go into figuring out what portion of a project is going to go towards aesthetic improvement, and what portion is going to go towards public art, and what portion is just going to go to the underlying construction of that. So as that has become more and more difficult to do consistently across the districts and across the city, the discussion started about 4 years ago on how do we quantify this, and then about a year and a half, 2 years ago is when the city manager established this ad hoc group through a couple members here in the community that Martha mentioned. If we pop over here, the proposed ordinance at this point in time is that we take 1.5% of a carve out of the CIP. It's not of the entire CIP. And of that amount, and we'll get more into the numbers on the next slide, but of that amount, 80% of that will go for new capital improvement projects. 20% of that will be for maintenance of what we currently have. Because one of the big issues that with the Division of Arts and Cultures has identified in Wichita is that we are not maintaining the current art and aesthetic improvement that we already have, and it would be foolhardy of our community to drive on building new projects and not have some kind of a call out for maintenance. So the little graphic here just shows that 80% would be available for new CIP, 20% would be available for maintenance of our current collection. examples from different cities. And the wording on there just says that this ordinance establishes guidelines for the selection of public artists and art consultants. It assures equitable distribution across districts and neighborhoods, and it specifies the responsibilities of city staff and design council regarding the maintenance of public art. So this new ordinance that we would like your input on is going to try to better quantify what we have been doing over the last 20 years. Those numbers are just gonna be absolutely impossible to read. So, the manager and the council, after we talked to them at a workshop, asked city staff to look back at what we have been spending, and city staff went to work on this, and they went back 5 years, and they dug through, I do not know how many invoices and how many projects, but it was a lot over the last 5 years, because we've been building a lot in Wichita. And as they looked at the last 5 years, the calculation came out to 2.4% of our entire capital improvement budget. That is about 2.4 million a year if you were to extrapolate that forward. If you were to take that percentage forward, that would be about 2.4 million a year that has gone towards that. So we initially started out saying we would like 1% of the entire CIP, like many of our other cities are doing. And we looked, Wichita has some unusual funding that goes on with special assessments. And we wanted to try to carve that out. So working with finance, working with city council, working with city manager's office, a proposal has come forward that would take 3 funding sources that are within the CIP. That would be the bonded projects, that would be the local sales tax, and then a small piece of a guest transient tax. And right now, the proposal is we take 1.5% of that, and we set that aside for the design council to then apply to projects. At 1.5% extrapolated forward, that would be about 1.1 million a year. So if you'll recall, we look back 5 years, and the extrapolation takes us to 2.4 million. So we would be putting into ordinance a lesser amount than we've spent over the last 5 years, extrapolated forward. However, if you all remember, we've built a new airport, and we've had a huge Kellogg expansion going on. And if you've had the chance to drive east through the construction zone, you can see that a lot of the overpasses and a lot of the walls as the highway dips down have very nice Kansas representative art pieces that are integrated. And you saw on the screen here, the airport has a large installation in there. So we don't feel like it's fair to put into ordinance the amount that we've been spending the last 5 years. We feel like that would be above what our peer and competitor communities are doing, because most of them have an ordinance about 1%, which would be about 1.7 million a year. So we've been at 2.4. Most are in the 1.7 area, and the proposal on the table is a 1.1. So what our committee would like your feedback on is we are proposing 2% of those 3 limited funding sources, and that would take us to about 1.5 million a year that would be set aside. So currently, we're at 2.4 over the past 5 years. Most of our peer communities are doing 1.7. Right now, the ordinance is written with 1.1, and we are recommending 1.5. So as you've looked through all of these slides, seen the pictures, I want to leave you with the keeper of the plans as it was originally installed, and that was before the ordinance was passed in 1999. It was installed as the picture on the left shows, once we had an ordinance saying we should be considering art and aesthetic improvement in our projects, then the keeper was then elevated, the fire pots were added, and the pedestrian bridge, because before you can kind of see the little pathway through the trees, that's how you could get to the keeper of the plains. I doubt that that was drawing many tourists. But today, after spending money and making this attractive and making it something Wichita can be proud of, now we have the keeper that we're all familiar with. So as you're thinking about what you would recommend to your council person, consider the numbers that I've given you, consider what we can do with it, how we can make our community and our districts better, and then feel free to ask me any questions you'd like.
Can you clarify the amount that the ad hoc committee, the percentage that the ad hoc committee is recommending?
We're recommending 2% of those three funding sources. That would be the bonded projects, the local sales tax projects, and then there's a few projects that are in the budget that occasionally use some of the hotel tax that we collect. So what we've done is we've just gone to the city budget, the CIP budget, the capital improvement budget that runs out for 10 years, and we've applied these percentages to what we see in the future from those three funding sources. 1.5% as it's currently written would give us 1.1 million a year. 2% as we're recommending would give us 1.5 million a year. And over the last 5 years, we have spent, if you extrapolate forward, we have spent right at 2.4 million a year. So we are suggesting that we land at about the 1.5. Now, if we do build something really big like the airport, there's nothing that says the city council and the design council can't work together and cannot allocate more funds to that if they wanna make whatever this new project is extra special. There's nothing here that says they can't. All this does is set aside an amount of money for design council to work with city staff and the city council on projects that are ongoing. And it sets a process in place that covers all the gaps we've identified in the 20-year-old ordinance. Is that what you were looking for?
Yes, thank you. Are there any questions?
Okay.
Dalton's got a question here.
You had mentioned that the projects would be divided among the different districts. How would that be implemented, or how would that be enforced, that they would be divided across the different districts in the city?
The way that it's written into the ordinance is that which district the project is located in must be a consideration. As city staff presents the design council with, let's say, the 2020 projects, then they will list out the projects that are set there, and the design council will then look at each district. Many times when a council person's district has a big project coming up, they will attend the design council meetings, and they'll be able to have input into that. So what it does is it says, that must be a consideration, and as they're looking at it, they'll say, we have not done something large in District 4 for a while. This year, let's make sure we do something special in District 4.
Does that differ from the status quo currently? And
Status quo currently does not call out anything about fairness or spreading the projects across the city.
okay, thank you.
Now, I don't wanna leave that with an impression that they haven't done that, because the airport obviously is in this district.
Yeah.
And that park that they only saw is in this district. We have some nice things, there's some nice bridges in this district.
Arlen, can you just kind of clarify, because we've had several discussions about this. Has there been any scope creep, or has this always been the same? Because I thought originally we were just looking at brand new buildings and the aesthetics going around with that. Now, are we looking at like sculptures and different things that aren't necessarily with that building, or is it always gonna be attached to a new construction or a remodel project? Can you just make sure we're on the same page?
We've always found that any of the projects, any of the standalone art is almost always in a projects. What has changed is rather than using the projects or the entire CIP or CIP minus enterprise funds, the discussion has shifted to where those funding sources would establish the amount, but the projects would still come to design council from city staff, and then those would then be approved by the city council. So if we were to say build a new performing arts center, let's use that as an example, then on the grounds, if there was something in the proposal that said we should have something special here that says Wichita, then there could be a piece that was not attached to the building, but it would be on the grounds.
Can you better explain to me the fair and equity part of it? Because I'm trying to figure out if the area doesn't have a building improvement, then I mean, it could go a decade or longer before they really see any aesthetic improvements there. Is that correct? Or?
Right, so if you didn't have a new airport, you might not see some major project, but there's 3 people from the design council on our ad hoc committee, and the way they're talking about it from around the table is you're always having bridges replaced, or you're having fire stations put in, or you're having police substations replaced, and they would be putting dollars towards this thing to make sure that this district, as you drove down the street, you'd be able to say, I see, that does not look like a Soviet style, just concrete bridge. Look, there's some pieces to that. You go on down the way, you see your new fire station, you say, oh, there's some architecture to it rather than a metal building. So
That's where I thought we were headed. I was just a little bit confused with the presentation tonight.
they were trying to find some pretty pictures to put in here.
Right.
We did have a photographer running around town trying to get different pieces of Wichita, but they ran out of time, so then we started dropping stuff from those.
If I understood you correctly, at the 1.5%, you're actually asking for less money than what you had been spending?
That is what is in the ordinance as written, that was written by city staff as they were helping us with that. The 1.5 is their recommendation, or at least, I'm not gonna say their recommendation. That's what came to us in the ordinance as legal and finance went through it to help us with the ordinance. Our recommendation is that we should up that to 2%, which would still be less than what we have been spending, but we believe that it probably should be somewhat less than what we have been spending because of those very large projects that have been in the last 5 years.
I'm curious about the motivation to cut the budget on what had been spent in the past.
Our whole reason for starting this 4 years ago was to make sure that we were competitive with our peer cities that are fighting us for jobs and citizens. So all along, we've looked at that 1% of the entire CIP so we could compare ourselves to those 360 municipalities. So we did not want to come into this and say, in Wichita, we should be spending more than most of our competitors in peer cities. And I know it does seem counterintuitive for people that care about art and aesthetic improvement to come and say, let's put less into our ordinance going forward, but we just feel like it's a more fair amount. We don't want to tie the city's hands. We don't want to try to compete with Austin at this point in time. Now, down the road, if the citizens come back and say, Austin is our target and we want to go after them, there's nothing that says we can't go back and alter this. But right now, we feel like the fair amount is to come in at 2% of the limited funding sources.
I'm trying to justify it in my own mind why we need an ordinance for this when, by your own admission, over the last 5 years, you've actually spent more money on art than this ordinance would provide for. But the ordinance would mandate that money be spent on art, would it not?
It would mandate that that amount as a minimum be used by the design council and the city council and city staff as they.
So more could be spent than the 1.5?
Could be spent than the 1.5 or the 2, just as the amount today has just been established out of whole cloth.
That's kind of what Arlen was getting at a little bit ago. You'll have this amount of money, but we're gonna do the ballpark or something else, and other folks can get involved. they're likely gonna run it over that.
Come back and they'll say to the city council, do you guys want it to be something special, then they can go above. The main reason that we're addressing this now is, at this point in time, we have a city council that gets it. We have a city manager's office that's been in place for quite a while, and they have their arms around how this needs to work to compete with other cities. We don't know who's gonna be in office 5 years from now, and we don't know who's gonna be city manager 5 years from now unless Mr. Lake chooses to work until he's past 70. That could happen, but I don't know that it will, so we're just always trying to make sure that we stay competitive.
But we also don't know what the economic conditions are going to be 5 years from now, and it may be such a thing that that becomes problematic. I hate to see these things enshrined when it's not necessary. And the fact that we've been doing better than this ordinance would provide for seems to me that it's a non-issue.
So my difficulty with that is, yes, the economy does move up and down, and we have been on a bull market and a growth since 2009, so we are primed for a recession. But what I would throw out to you is, rather than, if things go south on us and the economy does slow down, rather than us building buildings and bridges that are plain metal corrugated buildings or just plain old concrete bridges, we would just slow down on our projects. The projects we do, this ordinance just makes sure we do them right. Because if we're gonna compete for jobs, no one wants to move to a community that's just ugly, utilitarian. So I would recommend that, yes, we do need to slow down our spending during a recession, but we should still make sure that it's competitive and that we're all proud of it rather than it just being functional.
I understand the need for the art. If we look back, during the Depression, there was a lot of money spent employing people to build public works and so forth. The town I grew up in had a Board of Water and Light that had a big facade that had art on it, and it was something that was well known by anybody who had been through the city, and that was all paid through that kind of stuff. And then post Depression, we started getting into this plain Jane kind of stuff where buildings were basically just structures, and we didn't think too much about the aesthetics. But we've gotten past that, and we're already seeing that we're spending money that way, and I'm just saying I don't see the need. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for your feedback.
Dave, you have a question?
I have a question. So if we do pass this ordinance, is there gonna be something in there that says we only employ Wichita artists? I mean, I see through your slides, you have the artists' names listed for the pieces that they've done, and some have done several pieces for different communities. I mean, Wichita State has a wonderful arts program. You have Newman, you have Friends University. How do we keep that money in Wichita? I don't wanna employ an artist from Des Moines to do something for the Wichita citizens, so how is that gonna be addressed, and how's that money gonna be allocated if that money is there?
That is a tough one. It's tough for me too, because I know we have a very creative community here. The reason the folks on the committee have not wanted to put in limiting the artists to Wichita is if we're doing a big project like the Kellogg walls, were done by a nationally known artist. And she brought in concepts that many of our local folks probably were not capable of doing, because these are very, very large concrete forms and walls, and she had experience with that. But I will tell you that a lot of our local projects have been done by local artists, but they didn't really want us to handcuff the design council and keep us from being able to be a world-class city. But I do know that the design council is going to have a process where everyone can be on an approved list, and we have used a lot of local artists like the keeper of the drains. I don't know if you saw that in here. He's right down there by the keeper of the plains, and it was done by Connie Arnett that lives down on Commerce Street. So we have kept a lot of those dollars in town, but they were afraid of handcuffing the design council by saying, you can only do this. We
is the status quo where the design council has final approval of the designs that are implemented, does that stay the same, or does that change at all, or is that not even the reality now?
That is not the reality now. Right now, design council recommends it to the city council, and the city council has final approval.
And would that be the same in this ordinance?
That would be the same in this
Okay.
ordinance. The ordinance mostly clarifies the relationship between all the city departments and the design council to make sure they work together very smoothly.
Okay, thank you.
How does one become a member of the design council?
There are criteria for who sits on the design council. I don't have that right in front of me, but if you happen to be within one of the categories, then you would be appointed by either the mayor or your council person. Councilman Blubow, do you know?
I think I think they're all mayor
They're all
appointees.
mayor appointees. Okay, so I'd imagine his colleagues or the vice mayor could, have input onto that. So that's something you were interested in. I would certainly, talk to your council person. See
Are those paid positions?
They are not paid positions. They're all volunteers.
Very good.
Does anybody else on the, have any questions right now?
Oh, yeah, I've held that.
You ready? Okay, you see me.
To follow up on that last question,
Chris, I'm gonna let Michael go, and then I'll go to you.
Sorry.
So what other CIP spending mandates are in place for other groups already? What other groups, what other interest groups have ordinances that dictate percentages of the budgets of any sort that are spent on?
At this point in time, the only thing that would be mandated for the CIP would be structural integrity or from an engineering standpoint. So this is just approaching it from the other side of that. So it is mandated that it has to meet certain criteria.
I think you're misunderstanding my question. In other words, so this is, art gets 1.5%. Does parks, does transportation, does this, does any of those top 10 items that all the citizens of Wichita just voted on in a recent poll have any mandate on the amount of money that are spent of the annual budget each year?
So of the CIP,
Right?
we have all of our projects, whether it's transportation or whether it's new
Right.
babies, those are all there.
All right?
All this is trying to do is say that
Respectfully, Arlen, I think you're talking around my question. Does anybody have an ordinance that says thou shalt spend under lethal force of law this amount of money, this percentage of a city budget? That's what you're asking in your ordinance, is that there will be a law, okay, enforced by these gentlemen right here, by our councilman, that will be spent on these items. And I don't know of any. I'm asking anybody in this room to tell me if parks, if transportation, if water, if anybody has a mandated minimum amount spent on them. And everybody's blank stares. Exactly, and that's what so we're talking about fairness, okay? Because you want to be fair and equitable. I got to tell you, there's a whole lot of other things on the budgetary priorities that I would rather see have a mandated minimum amount of spending each year. These guys, fire, water, those 10 items that all the citizens of Wichita just voted on, okay? And see that before I thought about what money was to make the concrete on the highway look pretty. And I'm not trying to minimize your efforts, okay? Philanthropy in those areas is fantastic. And if the people want that, then so be it. We elect our officials here to manage a budget, and the city manager to manage a budget, to manage those priorities that are important, and they're gathering feedback and whatnot. But what you're asking to do is to codify in the law a minimum amount of money over and above, so that nobody else can touch that, get that. And I take strong objection to that.
Okay. If I don't dive too deep into numbers world, but we have the operational budget, which is used to pay for fire and police and for transportation, all those other things that we need to have a city that runs streets.
Right.
Then we have our capital improvement budget.
Correct.
Which is strictly for building new construction.
Right.
And what we're trying to do is within parks, just like the shelter that's up that's in a park. There will be many parks projects. One right now that's going on are the new splash pads and swimming pools. Well, they have an art and aesthetics piece to them. So all of these projects, whether it's a new bus terminal, or whether it's a new fire station, new police station, all this does is say there should be some consideration. Please don't just drop concrete walls in and make our community ugly.
And I don't necessarily disagree with you with that, and I don't think our community's ugly the way it's been going on already. Somehow our community has rallied via philanthropy and via the priorities of our city councilmen through our normal legislative process to figure out how to get that done without using the force of law, okay, to make sure that gets done. And I just see that it's a slippery slope, because you'll be the first. If this happens, you'll be the first, but there will be others that come behind you that start mandating certain amounts of money be spent by law. And when that stuff is on the books, it's really hard to get back off, okay?
I would certainly be happy to discuss any examples you might have of that. We've just looked across the nation. We've seen there's over 300 cities, and we're about number 50 on the list, and all of them already have this in place. They're competing with us for jobs.
If we want to compete for jobs, the best thing we could do is lower our tax rate and make ourselves a good business competitive environment. The folks that are locating businesses here, I'm sorry, are not looking for pretty concrete on the highways. Okay, those things don't equate when they're doing their P&Ls.
I can sure show you some studies that would possibly help you understand that, possibly change your mind, but maybe not. We don't always get to the same place. But I live in this world, I look at the numbers and the tax rates to a certain point no longer drive business. Instead, they want to be able to attract employees, they want to be able to attract customers, and those people want amenities. And it seems that the best way for us to do that is for us to all have this in one place, whereas we don't have to have a Charles Koch saying, hey, I will beautify this piece of the highway.
Well, you're talking about volunteerism versus collectivism. I mean, essentially what you're doing is forcing the will of that on everybody else versus saying, hey, everybody, let's all volunteer and contribute money to making our community look beautiful, rather than, hey, I'm gonna go to my neighbor and forcibly take it from him to make our community look beautiful. I think we all want the same thing. We all want an attractive, great place to live. But the difference is that I don't believe that we should be conscripting that money and mandating it by force of law to make sure it's spent that way. We both want the same outcome. We disagree on the method to achieve those. And I would much rather have my elected official, all of them, have the freedom year after year after year to spend the money that they see fit on the priorities that they hit each year, rather than, and again, more will come. More will come. Art will be first, and then another, and then another, and then another. Before you know it, their hands are tied.
Absolutely.
So, that's all I got, Councilman.
I have a question, a kind of connection to that. What percentage of public art in the community is donated by philanthropy at this point? Are you aware of that number? What percentage donated philanthropy opposed to funding sources like this? Is there a current number on that in the city?
There is not a number that I am aware of. Most of the philanthropy goes towards
Private.
projects inside or projects that are private.
Okay.
So I know that Cargill spent money on a new building, and they have an artist component and aesthetic improvement components, but that's not quantified.
Okay.
I'll come back to the dab, if it's okay, we'll go back to the public.
Sure.
One of the issues I've run across recently with regards to the committee is they don't fully understand some of the neighborhoods that they're doing art in. With regards to the baseball stadium, there were some questions about the design work that they've been putting out for the baseball stadium, and I started questioning members of the committee. They didn't even realize that we had an overlay in the layout that governs aesthetic looks and architectures and things like that with regard to what's built in the land. And that's kind of disturbing if there's not a representation on the board of an aspect of the community. How can it be properly communicated to the board that's making the decisions?
You're referring to the design council committee members?
The design council, yes.
The design council wasn't aware of the Delano overlap.
Apparently not the one spoke to.
Okay. Well, I'd imagine the city staff that's working with them would be familiar with that, and hopefully before we came up with a final.
But apparently it wasn't being communicated.
Well, part of this updated ordinance does address the communication between the departments and the design council, and it lays out a.
I kind of share some of the concerns they have with that. You even said that you guys didn't know how much you were spending until you went through it and started like looking at every dollar spent. I'd like to see some more study about whether or not we even need to have an ordinance, because you guys are already spending more than what everybody else is, just the way we're doing it now.
As I said, I don't wanna beat this to death.
I know.
All right, I'm not saying you are, I just don't wanna repeat what I've been saying. But
Right.
our concern is Kellogg's been so big, and the airport was so big.
But those
We don't wanna
projects,
put that in.
those projects included ARC as part of their project funding.
They did under our current city management, our current council that understands the importance.
And what you've said is that if there is a big project that comes along like that, you may get funding for the ARC for that project outside what you're asking for.
If city council chose to go that direction, but that would be something they would have to decide.
So it might be a moot point.
It is a possibility. The key here is that it gives the city staff, the design council, and the city council a structure to work within. And they all seem to feel like that it would make it easier for them if it was structural rather than right now just being wide open. The stories that they've shared about how difficult it is for them to try to figure out what is that number for the new swimming pools and splash pads. What was that number for Kellogg? What was that number for the airport? And it's just everybody kind of working together and hope that's in the minutes.
There's philanthropy.
There we go, volunteerism at work.
There is an app already out there by Bike Walk Wichita that does something like that. All you have to do is plug in the data.
Excellent. Well, it looks like we're getting closer. I think that would be a great thing, because I'll have to say I walked away from Columbia a little envious that it was so easy for me to find there what they were proud of. Excellent.
Any other questions? Not, I'm gonna bring it back to the,
I have one last question, I promise. I asked tons of questions, so apologize for that. Could we have data on what the historical minimum that we spent is? You said over the past 5 years, it was 2.4%. Can we see what the historical minimum was and what projects were implemented? You know, let's say a 30-year history, if we did reach the 1.2 or the 1.5 as proposed, or if it's been on average around, 1.7. Could we look at more historical data for previous years as well?
I know we could go back 5 years, because finance has already done that. I'm afraid there was so much work involved in going back 5 years. If they had to go back 30, we'd probably have to hire additional staff.
Okay.
As this goes forward, our hope is that it is all kept and quantified, and we'll always know how to benchmark ourselves against other communities. But they put a tremendous, I'm speaking for them more or less from that department, but I feel like they put a tremendous amount of effort into going back for 5 years and came back with a good report. But we can certainly share more information from that report with you.
Well, thank you for your presentation. I think you guys did a nice job. So.
I do have one last question. Have you reached out to the community for donations? And if you have reached out to the community for donations, what was the response? When you said businesses want to have a more beautified city to have employees, have you went to the top 10 employers in the city and asked them to kind of contribute some money? I mean, if somebody wanted to donate, charitable giving to the organization, how would one do that? Is there some sort of mechanism, like a GoFundMe? Is there a PayPal? I mean, so I'm thinking, if we have this surge of people that want to give, how do we go about doing that?
For actual public art, as is traditionally described, we have a program called the Sculpture Walkabout in Wichita. And right now it is concentrated in Old Town and down by the arena. That program is administered by the Arts Council, so any of the large business folks, they will get a tax deduction for contributing to that. And yes, they have been approached, and yes, they do contribute. So next time you're in Old Town, if you see anything that's on a base, on a concrete base over there, it was sculpture, that has been paid for with private.
Well, I think you kind of missed that. So for your budget, right? So you're only 2% of the CIP funds. But what happens if you go to the public and you say anybody can donate to our fund?
It makes it a little difficult when you try the logistics of taking money that's been donated by the community and then working it into, like, say, the baseball stadium. It just becomes very difficult. Many times they want naming rights. Now, if we do a group on the Arts Center, more than likely, there could be naming rights up for that. We've seen that in convention centers. We've seen that with the arena that was paid for with public dollars. That was then, naming rights were sold off to Intrust Bank, so now we all know there's Intrust Bank Arena. So there are always programs like that in place that can help. But as far as having someone fund a stretch of highway as the city's trying to get that done, the mechanism becomes very, very difficult.
Well, I'm just thinking, if somebody wanted to donate $5, could they write you a check for $5 and this goes right into 20 your general funds for our? That's what I'm talking about. Like the zoo has their night out, the zoo, and people donate money, and like if I wanted to write you a check for $100 and you spend it on our, can I do
Did you
that?
write it to the city of Wichita?
Yeah, who would I write that to? If I wanted to donate money, and I felt strongly about it.
The challenge comes in with regard to people often want a tax receipt, and you're not going to receive that from the city of Wichita. But if you want to pay more taxes, I'm sure the city can come up with a way. What do you think, Mark?
We would be happy to take any donations from any case. To get a tax deduction, you would need to donate to a 501c3. And specifically for that, we do have the Sculpture Walkabout, which is public art. And you see it all through the area. And if more and more funds come in, then that can be expanded to the river corridor, then that can be expanded to the different districts. But it's a fairly new program. But as far as
David, that's too much work. What they're wanting is to have something enshrined in government from now to eternity, that they know that they'll have money and they won't have to go out and raise funds from the private sector.
Do you guys have any other questions? No? Arlen, Martha, thank you guys. I know you guys put a lot of time into this. And presented to council and met with all of us individually, so I appreciate your time and efforts.
Appreciate your time. Thanks for your service to
Thank
our
you.
community.
You guys wanna make a motion, or how you wanna proceed?
There's no vote.
No motion or no vote, just FYI? Okay, all right. Any comments we need to capture, or we kind of understand the feeling? I think it pulls.
If I can't even donate money, you know, for something, you know, whether they're wanting guaranteed funds year and year after versus taking it piece by piece. And once you start that machine down the road, I mean, I think if the city of Wichita wanted it bad, then there should be a GoFundMe page, or there should be, like, the Humane Society or the zoo. I mean, because the citizens are crying out for it. I mean, they shouldn't have to have red tape to donate $100 to their general fund, I guess, is what.
I mean, all the questions you guys are asking are questions I've asked, and I think a few months back, I went out to the DAB and kind of asked you guys where your positions were on this, because.
Do you have a quick comment? Could we get their personal, their city email or their email to correspond after this as well?
They're just volunteers.
Yeah, so can we get, their contact information after?
Yeah, I can send that out to all the DAB members
Okay.
for further clarification.
Yeah,
Okay.
if we have future questions, I always have tons of questions once I leave too.
Okay.
So.
Can we do police report real quick before we go on to the zoning case?
Sure.
To free up your time in case you get called out.
Well, I'm sorry I'm late, I got tired.
No, that's fine.
But, I don't think anything new. You guys have seen in the news recently how we've had a lot more violent crime in Wichita. I'm sure you guys are all aware of that our numbers have been pretty ugly lately in terms of violent crime. I will say that it was addressed pretty aggressively this summer during a many weeks long project in conjunction with federal agencies. We had a lot of officers that were focusing.
Officer Bill, could you step up there so I can get you on the podium?
No, I'm there. I'm here so that you can.
Thank you.
Sorry guys, it's my first dab.
That's
so welcome.
You're used to us telling everybody where to stand and how to.
Yeah. Excuse me, and I have a cold, so I've got all kinds of excuses tonight. Anyway, I haven't seen numbers yet in terms of arrests and bad guys off the streets and guns off the streets and things like that. But I know that it was a really successful assignment they had this summer. So hopefully we can begin to see some of that violent crime come down. Summertime is typically busier for us anyway, but that doesn't address all of it. So that was done. As far as I guess you guys are concerned when it comes to the violent stuff, I don't think anybody in here is a violent criminal or has a lot of association with that. I'm taking a guess here, but that doesn't mean that there isn't things that I think we can all probably do. A lot of those numbers are driven by domestic violence, so I think maybe a lot of us might know somebody who's in a tough situation like that, and if you do, it's important to speak up to that person, to us if it's at that level, so that we can become involved. I'm no expert on what's driving the numbers, but I know that, we can all help create an environment where that type of thing doesn't thrive. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for. And if anybody has feedback about how that can happen or anything that we can do better or differently to start fixing some of this, I'm happy to hear that. If anybody has questions.
Any trends? Usually we talk about trends.
Yeah, and the biggest one, again, is the violent crime, specifically aggravated assault. Some of the other big violent stuff, homicide, robbery, things like that, have actually come down just a little bit. Ag assaults are just through the roof for some reason. Aggravated assaults, for those of you that don't know, would be an assault either with a deadly weapon of some kind or something that would cause great bodily harm. So it's a felonious level assault, and that's been up a lot for us. And I think people that are smarter than I were trying to figure that out and also have, and I think if you guys have been to a lot of these, we kind of sing the same song about the auto larcenies and things like that. That's always a concern, and again, it's because it's preventable, I think is why you hear it from us so often. Don't keep your stuff in your car, lock your car, don't leave your car running in your driveway, that kind of stuff. That's gonna be a trend, forever, as long as that stuff continues to go on, I think. Our big focus right now is that aggravated assault, trying to figure out ways to deal with that.
You're South Patrol, is that correct?
I'm west.
West, okay.
Yes, sir. I'm 13B, which is bordered on 3 sides by
Yeah.
south, so I'm basically south.
You know, we always notice this, we know it's a delicate balance Friday and Saturday night when you're sending a lot of officers downtown to close the bars. And I got a text from another elected about 3 weeks ago. Her daughter had a burglary and it was around midnight, and it took the officers till about 3 to show up. I know that happens, and I know why it happens, and I explained to her why it happens, but are you seeing an increased call load, or does it look like they're kind of, during that peak, I don't know if you work those hours, or?
Yeah, and I certainly don't work those hours.
Okay.
I sleep those hours.
Right.
But, I don't know if that time period, if shutting down Old Town is taking so many officers off the street, I can see why that would happen for
Mhm.
sure. I don't know if it would bear out in numbers or not, but I definitely see why it could happen. The other side of that though is we use a lot of specialty units for that too. So we're using CRT, we're using the mounted unit and things like that. So we're trying to pull resources from other places besides patrol. That being said, if they've got a big thing like the other night, they just had a homicide down in Old Town or close to it, it's gonna pull a lot of patrol off of it, and it's just gonna be horrible response times on pretty much everything else.
Any questions?
Not so much a question, but maybe just a comment, because, in light of the shootings, there's this, national, discussion of, access to care and access to weapons. And, I know your side is kind of thinking, because you're saying you're seeing more aggravated, assault, essentially, and maybe that's, part of that discussion that you might wanna maybe kind of consider, is do we have maybe more access to medical care that maybe might help drive some of that down a little bit, or do we maybe somehow limit the way they're getting the weapons, maybe bring that down? It might still be aggravated, but not maybe aggravated assault with a weapon, it might be a lower misdemeanor down the lane.
Well, and by weapons, I assume you mean firearms.
Yes, in
particular.
general, yeah.
And I will say that, I'm not going to dive into the gun control thing, right? I'm definitely not doing that, but I will say that aggravated assault, could be done with a steak knife from your kitchen. All right, so it's not necessarily something that we can limit, with that particular crime. Access to care, I think, which is really good. All right, when you call an ambulance, they're gonna typically get there home before we do, to a lot of these things, and get these folks to a hospital. And I think that could actually be, just speculating, but I think that's probably driving down the homicide numbers. Because I think a lot of these aggravated batteries in particular would be homicides if we didn't have such good medical care. Good medical care is not gonna prevent an aggravated assault. It'll help assault the person and then assault the person. It'll help, get the person back on their feet afterwards, but, yeah, I guess I don't know the answer to that, but access to weapons and firearms in particular, I don't think it's gonna matter particularly on that number because a weapon could be so many different things, to count as an aggravated assault, if that makes sense.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you coming in tonight.
Sure. Sorry for being late.
No problem.
Thank you,
sir. You got one planning case, I believe?
Good evening, Councilman, dead members, nice to be back before you. We have one case tonight, it's a rezone request on, West Douglas and 500 block, building 551 through 555. They're asking to rezone that property from LC to GC, primarily in order to be able to accommodate a tenant who happens to be with us tonight. Lady that is wants to operate a tattoo parlor out of that building. if you've been down there, you know the building's been remodeled and renovated and made very attractive. Fits well in the middle of that block, and this rezone, in actuality, half of the building's actually zoned GC, half of it's zoned LC, that's gonna make the whole thing GC. So, we're recommending approval. Planning Commission did act on this, it is recommended approval. So it's actually scheduled to go to the city council next week, but because of timing, here we are tonight, so. Be happy to answer any questions, and as I said, we have the tenant here if you have any specific questions about that.
Are there any objections during the comment period from residents?
No, didn't hear a thing from anybody. She chose to believe that she needed to speak to the case and sat through a very long planning commission meeting on a whole bunch of other issues and realized this was basically almost a consent approval. So yeah, she got to experience what the planning commission's all about.
I'm sorry.
So, but no, we've not, and I got no phone calls on this particular issue.
So, sorry, what makes it differ from limited commercial to general?
The use that she wants, she's looking for a tattoo parlor. Under the zoning code, tattoo parlors are not allowed in LC, but they are in GC. And half the building's already zoned GC.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, it's pretty.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Where can that happen?
I'm gonna make a motion to approve it.
Second.
Wait,
Well,
who made the
shouldn't-
motion?
Shouldn't we see if there's
Matt?
any input from the community?
Is there any public input?
We've had similar businesses in Delano many times in other areas, so I don't see why it can't fit there.
We're happy to have her in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And if staff wanted to ever come up with a bright idea, I say we go ahead and go both sides of Douglas, just go GC the whole thing to prevent other business owners from having to nickel and dime.
You wanna make that motion?
Well.
We also talked about, there was a point in time where a lot of this was gonna be the next industrial park 40, 50 years ago, so we got homeowners who were in limited commercial, who their house falls down to their basement and they're not allowed to rebuild their house. So I think there may be opportunities for bulk zoning that would save our business owners and our homeowners a whole lot of trouble. Down the road, another day for another topic.
We have
But
another
then she'd
plan.
miss out on this planning
Tattoo.
commission. Okay,
Since
all
there's-
those-
the motion.
Yeah, we've got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Thank you all. There you go.
Anyone have any updates or any information to share? Tomorrow's election day, so I hope you guys all get out and vote. Kiddies are going back to school and everybody's getting back into routines.
A couple of announcements. Neighborhood night out coming up in Delano, and Delano neighborhood cleanup coming up within the next couple of weeks. The neighborhood night out is Tuesday right before school starts or right as school starts, depending on which grade your kid is in. And then the following Saturday is the cleanup. So.
Garage sale.
Oh yes, there's a garage sale opportunity the weekend before the cleanup, but it's just people have to go down and do the permit or go online and do the permit.
National Night Out's the 13th. that's
Yeah,
what I thought,
the
yeah.
13th, and then the 17th is the cleanup.
Yep, 17th.
And the national night out, or the neighborhood night out is gonna be at the park across the
Yeah.
street from the Allison Middle School.
And we have, how many do we have, Becky, total? We have quite a few of them in the district.
Yeah, but I haven't seen anything from Delano on that
Right.
list yet.
The group that's doing it is actually the district church, and this is the first time they've done it, so I think it's just a matter of them not knowing the process to get it on her list. So that's one reason why I wanna mention it.
All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Ron, second by Stephanie. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? See you guys September 9th.
Good comments.
We're gonna have Dad on Labor Day. It'll be the.
I don't remember exactly.